Il prossimo intervento non per caso approfondirà in maniera diversa questo stesso tema, perché avremo con noi Eric Klarenbeek dello studio Klarenbeek Dros. They are designer who collaborate on R&D and design projects since 2014.
Hey.
Hello. Hello.
Great.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
Yeah, very good.
Okay, so I was just introducing you to the public.
You. Very kind.
And our last guest concluded her speech by imagining the fabrication of robots that will dissolve into the soil and will become part of the ecosystem. So I was introducing your work, which is very focused on this. And so Klarenbeek and Dros have collaborated on R&D and design projects since 2014, striving for new local economies and production chains, material development, and durable design objects. For the project, they connect university, high-tech company, as well as farmers with local producer. So a very interdisciplinary way of working, which is really a common ground for all the people involved today, which is very significant on my point of view. The Mycelium project started with the creation of the Mycelium chair in 2010, which was published and exhibited extensively and resulted in the funding of a company for mycelium-based product named Crown in 2017. Also, the studio worked on the development of biopolymers from local sources, 3D bakery, AMS in 2015, AMS circular supply chain for the city in 2016, and the Algae Lab at Luma Foundation in Arles in 2017, resulting in an algae-based products by integrating durable and sustainable production methods. The newest network is called the Seaweed Circle, which integrates and introduces a seaweed-based production network focusing on sea farm biopolymers. Sorry, these very scientific terms, that's really difficult. So their intervention is called circular design and closed cycle production. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Wow, great. I would have loved to be with you. So I give my love and spirit and passion from the Netherlands. We're close next to Amsterdam in Zaandam, here in the wetlands, the swamps of Holland. And I hope I can take you with me on a journey along these organisms and our projects as designers. So let's go. I have a lot of images to show, so I hope really that will be of help. We're very visual, as you can imagine. So I really hope it comes through. Yeah. So what we do, I work together with Márcia Dros, my partner, and we worked roughly from 2010 on setting up like new structures for production, combining social workspaces, people, local makers with local resources. So, for instance, making a bench out of a tree, from local trees with the local woodmaker, setting that up. That gradually evolved towards robotics, but still from this kind of perspective of reusing. So at that time, the materials, there wasn't a lot of clarity about the materials used or the materials we had access to. So this project we worked on. So I just show one slide. It's too much. It's part of an industrial complex where a lot of people are living here in the Netherlands, and there we combined like consumer plastics collecting with industrial streams, collecting them and converting them and locally. So these plant pots we 3D printed on spot out of the consumer plastics. We made the tiles out of deconstructed buildings, and in that sense you try to combine. So that's kind of the we call it the kind of the old idea of the circular economy, based on recycling, reusing and reducing. But we have to stretch that further. We have to remediate. We have to nurture our environment and start to think ahead of that. And that was the beginning of the 3D printing mycelium. And luckily, the formal speaker explained to you a lot about fungi. So I hope that was very helpful in that sense. So what we tried to do, we combined mycelium technology with robotics. And at that time, nobody was working on that. There was one player who was working on converting these organisms into products. So from a material perspective, highly interesting. And we thought, why not combine it with robotics? And that was kind of pioneering in trying to challenge and trying to bridge our field and these technologies. So what we did, we built bioprinters for mycelium. And as the formal speaker already explained, in the woods, you have these under the trees, under the leaves, you have this fungal network, these white threads of mycelium. And these white threads, they grow, they decompose everything in nature, everything which is organic, unfortunately not all the materials, clearly, as we have on our planet, such as the plastics, is quite hard to degrade, although there are mushrooms who are able to do that. But what they do, these hyphae, these wires, these white threads growing in the woods, they have basically this one cellular organism has an external digesting system. So they break down everything. And by doing that, they let's say I'm a mycelium hyphae. Yeah. So I'm growing, I'm exploring space for organic matter. And then I find some wood, something that I can decompose and that I can break down. And by doing that, they are degrading it and digesting it. And in that sense, also binding it. So by attaching and degrading it, they also kind of glue it together. So it works as a kind of binder. Well, if you would continue this process, eventually you would just have compost. This building would fall apart, this wooden house out of 1880. But if you stop it just at this moment and you freeze the mycelium, you have a stable material. So you start with organic matter. So what you see on this image, it contains out of hemp, sawdust, a little bit of mushroom, a little bit of water, and the mushroom binds all these natural fibers such as sawdust and hemp together. And then we developed the printers in order to get to these form studies, which you see here, these objects we realized. So we partnered together with the University of Wageningen to understand how this magic world of mushrooms would work and what the potentials are, and bringing our printers to the university, to these professors. This is a bioprinter with a syringe. You can add any living cell. What can we put in our bioprinters in order to let it, regrow and rebind? And by working with the mycelium, the mushroom research group, we started to explore this combination. So using a robot combined with this organism and let it construct structures. So as you have like sawdust, fibers, it's quite loose. So we combined traditional traditional printing with bioprinting. So it printed a very thin scaffolding outside wall of 0.5 millimeter, and every 2 centimeters it sprays in an infill, and that's like an ongoing process till you have something bigger. So you need a clean room. So we built our clean rooms quite out of a lot of secondhand materials in our studio. The printer is in there, the feeders to make these bioprinters working. And eventually this was the first chair we made back in 2013 with this technology. So fully filled with mycelium substrate in the outer wall out of a biopolymer. But what we also learned from this process and project was that these biopolymers, which we have to use more and more in our environment, because we know what happens with these traditional fossil oil-based plastics, they never break down. But you expect from these biopolymers that they would actually degrade, and that it would be easy for mycelium to degrade. We would expect, but that symbiosis and that connection wasn't that evident. So in order to get that more connected, we had to bring this process further. So this was the first chair. And when we grew it, we worked together with a mushroom farmer who is traditionally in food. So the whole mushroom industry is in food. And we try to convert them and try to convince them that there is a potential to add up, to use this technology, which we have in the Netherlands for 150 years. And not only for food production, because it's amazing. It's a one-cellular organism. You can divide it infinitely. So by using this technology and vertical farming, it's basically what it is. We could expand, like this only for food into materials and solve the plastic problematics partly with introducing these new materials, as this material can work as a plastic replacer, a styrofoam replacer, but also as a replacer for wood. So that was this idea of having this connection with nature by modeling this chair, by researching nature and mycelium and these kind of networks and converting it into a chair. We were seeking for a kind of new aesthetic, but also a kind of new way of fabrication. So instead of like that it almost becomes insane to think from, okay, we have to grow a tree for 50 years, cut it down, and then we're going to make a chair out of it or a table. Why not grow it in a week out of mycelium? So mind-blowing, and that's what basically happened here. So we print, and then it's very fragile. It's only loose fibers with a very thin coating out of a biopolymer, and then eventually after a week it fully solidifies. So then all the mycelium has grasped all these fibers and bound it all together, and then we leave it to dry, and then it stabilizes and it will stay as it is, as a wood. One could say. And as it was at the mushroom grower and with the university, it was just the incubation was almost perfect, and we just let it sprout mushrooms. That's what you see here, for the beauty of it. Not to say that it was a first experience, but as a kind of, the flower bouquet of the project, which adds up to kind of the poetry of the project, you could say. But we had to bring it further, and that's what you see here. This is kind of the second generation we worked on. So here we understood that these biopolymers on the market, which we have, which you maybe find around you, or maybe some, weren't that compostable. So we had to develop our own biopolymers, and that was kind of the starting with this second mycelium project phase. So here you see that the outer very thin layer is completely intertwined with the medium inside. So adding up to the compostability, fully compostable, and you can just throw it in your back garden and it would decompose. Well, being able to maintain it when it's dry, such as this wooden house, which is there for 1.5 century. So you can just use it as any wooden object, you could say. But we had to work on printing technology, characteristics, and improving these factors. And that came together in this chair, which we made in 2019 for Centre Pompidou in Paris. And there we combined the new technologies with even improved characteristics and more strength, basically, in the end. So this is you could say functional chair, although we only made a one-off. So it's very special chair, which is in the museum. But for us, it's also the kind of the starting point, the iconic starting point for a kind of new era which we're in, and showing the possibilities that we have and that technology can bring, and technology combines then with nature. So on a very good, constructive way. We also did it. We also understood that making this chair only wouldn't create impact, wouldn't create the volume and the mass we would imagine and we would wish for, because I think we all on this planet want this kind of shift and scaling up these kind of productions. So we started a factory, and this was the first project that came out of it, where we grew mycelium panels. So not using only this high-end technology of 3D printing, but combining it with more preforms, also 3D printed or not, and then being able to reuse these preforms over and over again in order to be able to scale much quicker. And that was the beginning of this growing pavilion, where we actually absorbed a lot of CO2 through production by using land plants, hemp and cattail. We were able to bind a lot of CO2 in these products, and we learned a lot about these kind of technologies. So now it's actually at the Floriade in the Netherlands. It's on show, so you can visit it if you like. It's a floral fair, and it's the story about this plant. Cattail is the name. Maybe you know it. It's very specific, very known, and we love it because it shows a kind of potential. And what you see, it grows in water. And what do we have in the Netherlands? A lot of water. And what do we have on this planet? A lot of water and little land. And that makes up kind of the beginning of this story. So it grows a lot of rooting structures under the soil. It binds a lot of CO2 under the soil from the rootings only. And then you have all these plants which you can use for industrial purposes, such as making buildings, or chairs, or tables, or other objects. And so you have kind of double function. So you bind it into the fibers of the plant, and you bind it into the soil. And by binding it into the soil suddenly, gradually grows up. It's called up farming. And therefore, we, because we are a very low country, the lowlands, and while the sea level is rising, we have a kind of imbalance, and that's only getting stronger and stronger. So these dikes, which we have to prevent us from the sea, are not going to be maintained after 2050. So when we gradually grow our lands up, we will eventually grow along the sea level rise. And that's a kind of vision which we envisioned with this project. And that's the story of the land plants, and that's the story of the infrastructures, and understanding these complex systems and trying to rework on connecting players which you originally wouldn't connect together. So the mushroom grower is now not only for food, he's now growing materials. They're growing leather. They're growing plastic replacers. We're going to make, insulation for buildings, for example. You name it. So there are a lot of applications where we are trying to shift this old markets, and we have to understand the whole cycle. So we need still land plants, fibers. So we use hemp from Groningen, or these cattails, but that's not grown yet. That's just like only on the vision, the story, using it, showing it again on a small scale. But we have an infrastructure for fiber hemp cultivation, and that's a perfect plant to use. But still, you need sweet water. You still need these plants, although they grow in 3 months, super quick, much quicker than trees. It has downsides, but that I will get back to later. But we want to create these remediating infrastructures. We want to connect biologists, understanding nature, and trying to set up infrastructures that cure, that heal. And that's super fascinating. And you can do it in a building, but you can also do it beyond. So we are also working on, for instance, green roofing, and it's maybe a bit boring word. These modular elements, as you see here, which is maybe a little bit more poetic green roof, as traditionally, and these kind of structures which keep on living after they have been printed. So they are absorbing water, organisms, in this case mosses, and these mosses attract all these nutrients from air. And by building it along a road, what we did here, this is a test setup, it's 2 or 3 meters. We could try and learn a lot about how could we print this, how could we build these structures, would they actually start living, would they absorb enough of all these fine dust, of all these excessive materials we have in our air, to compensate against, for instance, traffic in this case. So we calculated that if we would apply it along this route, it would compensate for the whole kilometers of each car, basically. But that's all still theory. This brought us from the land plants to the air and eventually into algae. Algae are massively interesting. They are there since the beginning of evolution. They are the best, the most efficient, and in CO2 conversion into oxygen and carbon, basically. And therefore, highly fascinating, because they can do it at a rate which is unimaginable, and there is no plant who can compete with that. And the variety is like endless. So there are many species, a lot unexplored, and so much potential in this world of algae. It's unimaginable. And this, what you see, is on our studio. It's a lab-grown seaweed. It comes from the sea, the North Sea, 15 years ago, and then spent his life in a lab where it's cultivated, and now it's brought back again to sea. So it's a native species, and that's again setting up these infrastructures for production, trying to find it, trying to understand it, and that led to the Seaweed Circle. So that includes propagation, that includes cultivation, not only taking from nature, but adding to nature. And in that sense, we're not only adding, we're adding not only seaweed, we're also adding up to biodiversity. And that's like monitored constantly with scientists and the institutes we collaborate with constantly. We also, like, then when we worked on that project for a couple of years in the Netherlands, we got the chance to initiate an algae lab at Atelier Luma in the south of France. It's a delta. It looks a little bit like the Netherlands, but the climate is slightly different, and you have these salt fields with a slightly different color due to microalgae. And these microalgae are amazing. They have a lot of potentials. You can use them for a lot, from biofuels to plastics to food to anything almost, you could say. So it has a lot of potential to explore. And we try we only focus on material, on converting it into colors, into pigments, into materials, into binders, into plasticizers to make materials more flexible or rigid. And this is the Algae Lab at Luma, building a team. So we built a team with microbiologists, artists, and technicians to work together to explore this new world. So currently it's called Algae platform. They have a library of all the native species from these delta wetlands, the Camargue near Arles, and we're exploring these potentials, and they are constantly like innovating, finding new colors or applications, and exploring that with artists and designers. And this is where we worked on. So we lived there for 2 years, and here you see some of the materials and colors we made, and we combined it with the Roman history of Arles. So we worked together with the museum there, which had a lot of Roman pottery and glassware, and these Roman glasses were found in the river in this delta, and were taken out, and now we're recreating these objects out of these organisms 2,000 years later. So, and here you see some of the Roman objects, almost one-to-one as the Roman glassware, you could say. And then we started playing with these forms to work towards, like now, in our own taste. So that's what you see here, these carafes and cups we made and which we applied while understanding and trying to work on the infrastructure for production, which you see here. Each cup, 20 minutes, one printer. And that's something we could print. We easily printed, for instance, for a dinner, 300 cups in a weekend. So there you see also the force and the power of these kind of technologies and these small scale robots, like working as a small scale factory and being able to implement on a hyper local scale a new infrastructure for production. And there we get into the Seaweed Circle. We also did it with the museum Boijmans van Beuningen in the Netherlands, which we found key objects of the plastic history. So what you see here of Kapier, utensils which we used in the 50s when aviation came up. They wanted lighter objects, such as these objects which people could take home. So the beginning of disposing objects, using them one time only. And we found these original molds in order to reproduce these cups out of our seaweed biopolymers. And that was super nice, because there you could learn from this kind of history of plastic, because they were so craft-like. You could only make one cup at a time, and it's not like the plastic industry we have nowadays. But that made us also possible to, it created the possibility to remake these objects on a very crafty way with a new material on an experimental basis. And after use, what do? It breaks down. So breaking down was really the key element of this. It's an online exhibition. It's still live. The breakdown economy, where we make things to break them down straight away. So they basically never exist. And that's what you see here. And after a few months, it's fully degraded, and now it's completely gone, I have to say. And the organisms from the water are digesting it. And that's what we showed through a live stream, which you could also follow for the past year, to see the degradation of the materials, which is key. Although you can do it from a very scientific, this is more a kind of soft art perspective. And there we made some other objects showing these potentials, showing the Fanola cups and the richness of these colors, and breaking them down. And that basically leads to the Seaweed Circle, and showing quickly kind of, this whole line. So we don't use any fresh water anymore. We grow it in the sea on these lines, which started in 2015 with this first meter. And this week we harvested 1 kilometer of rope. And it starts with the embryo of reproducing these one-cellular organisms, growing them up, like what you saw at the Algae Lab, ending them on lines, and then placing them in the sea. So now there are a few farms in the Netherlands pioneering, such as the seaweed farmers, which you see here, on this technology and scalability. And then we basically have a big juicer where we split the juice from the biomass, because like in the cells of these algae consist out of 85% of water. We're not going to throw that away. We're using it up. So we have a farmer or several farmers who are completely circular. They don't use any fertilizers and pesticides and use it now already for 4 years to have the plants grow on these nutrients from seaweeds. And then we convert the biomass, which bound all the CO2, into objects for injection molding to replace traditional plastic. So every factory who makes plastic objects can now use seaweed-based biopolymers. And we use it into robot printing to make other objects, such as this garden egg chair, which is now at Vitra Design Museum, a classic plastic design object, where we worked on 140 kilos of seaweed, which equals around 1,000 kilo of fresh seaweed, which equals around 10 big bags. So there you see the scale that we have to reach with cultivation of these seaweeds, and that we're long not there yet. That's something really kind of for the new coming era that we're going to work collectively on this planet, hopefully, on farming, that people get enthusiastic about these new technologies and start farming, sea farming instead of traditional farming. And this is one of the applications at the Frank Gehry Tower at Luma, the tiles we made for the toilets, again about water. And lastly, our newest project, it's Balancing Landscape, where we have like modular elements, so 2-cell, 3-cell, 4-cell, and you can combine them. And there we fill them up with hydrogels, and in these algae grow super fast. So we started here with white, with some plants, but the idea is actually you don't need any plants anymore, because algae are much more efficient in binding CO2 and producing oxygen, even for your house. And it's much easier than nurturing and keeping plants in your living room. So we wanted to show this kind of possibility, and that's what you see here. This is a droog design, and this currently at the Floriada, where you see also the color became bright green, so now it's producing oxygen like crazy. And now, super happy to share this with you. So this is it. Thanks a lot for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.